All right, in this video, we are going to go over all of the features, or at least a handful, the main majority of the features and the parameters that are in these families. So if you want to know what each of the parameters does and how it affects the door, this is your video. We're going to mostly focus on the swinging doors. Almost all the families have very similar parameters. Some might be unique, like for example, a pivoting door would have an extra parameter of where to put the pivot. So there will be some others that you can maybe discover on your own, but the majority of the parameters we'll cover in this video, and the other ones that we don't should be pretty self-explanatory. So let's just take a look. We're just going to select a door and we're going to go down the line. So before I get too far into it, you should know with all RevitFamily.biz families that you download from us, we only use a couple sections of the parameters over here. So if you come over here, you can collapse these sections. These first two sections are they're just built-in sections that Revit creates. I can't control those. So I'm going to shut those. I only use a couple. So we use the graphics section, we use the materials and finish section, and we use the dimension section. Those are the couple sections that you would use to control the doors. The rest are either Revit created by default and aren't things that I have built in, or the other category is where I put all the parameters that are automatically calculating that I use to do some of the creation of the family that isn't meant for you to mess with. So you can basically close everything except dimensions, materials, and graphics, both in the instance dialog and the type editing dialog. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go down the list. Let's look at these doors, and we'll start, let's do the double doors first. So you'll see, let me pull this out a little bit. First thing I try to do is name these so that you don't have to guess too much at what the parameters are going to do. The parameters are pretty much named as, I try to name them as briefly and still descriptively as possible. So this right here, these first two ones are going to control the trim style on either side of the door, so side one and side two. So we're looking, if I hover over this is a feature that I'll explain right now. When you hover over our doors, you'll see these little Roman numerals and these letters up here. And if you do it in floor plan, it does the same thing. Let me show you. If you hover over it or you select it, it shows you all of this. Now, what are these? So the 1 and the 2 describe which side of the door. This is side 2, this is side 1, and that corresponds to the parameters over here. So door trim style side 1 and door trim style side 2, changing that parameter for side 1 will affect this side of the door. Changing side 2 will change that side of the door. Now the X and the Y are only on double doors, but they label the leafs. So if you want to know which leaf is which, this right now, the right side is leaf X and the left side is leaf Y. So again, later there are some parameters that you control the leafs, and that helps designate the leafs. The last little bit you'll notice is this line right here. The distance from this line to the edge of the door is controlled by a parameter that I will go over later, but that helps you consistently align the doors with walls that run perpendicular. So you can align your door to the wall and know that it's always going to be a fixed distance. Okay, so that's what I like to call the door guide, and we'll be using it as we change parameters. So right now, I want to change the trim style on side 1. So let's go over here to door trim style, side 1, and we'll get a drop-down list. And depending on what style of families you bought, you'll get a different list possibly, but let's change this from a typical Craftsman. Let's change it to Cape Cod. So we'll click Cape Cod, and now it has changed the trim on this side. Now let's do something a little more drastic that's more obvious. Let's do mid-century modern. Okay, so now you can see one side is mid-century modern and the other side is traditional Craftsman. All right, the next thing on our list is the hardware style. So right now we just kind of have a round knob, but let's change side 1 to have something else. Let's have it change to maybe a handle. So we'll click that and you can see it changes to a handle. And again, the other side has stayed the same, so you can control them separately. All right, let's continue down our list. The next thing has to do with some of the trim options. So I'm going to go back up here and change it back to our Craftsman trim, and so that you can better see what this does, because not all trim has the same options. So the first thing we can do is turn the trim on and off for either side. So I can just turn the trim off so that you don't have to have it. A lot of time in commercial situations, we don't have trim on the door, so we shut it off. So we'll turn that back on. And then the next category is show fancy head trim. So what the fancy head trim is referring to is this up here. Do you want it to kind of have this header trim, or do you want it to just be kind of a sweep all the way around of this? The side trim and the head trim should be the same. And then we also have what's called plinths down here. So let's take a look at those. If we click on this door, we're going to turn off the fancy head trim, and then look what it does. Do you see how it gets rid of that header piece? And then below that, it'll say show trim plinth. So the plinth is what's down here at the bottom. We can shut that off. So we can control how simple or how complex of a trim we want. And then we can also just turn off the door hardware. Sometimes you don't want to show hardware. You can turn that off as well, just by clicking that button. So now we've kind of simplified this side one of the door. All right, then there's other hardware options you can choose to have. If you'd like to have a closer, you can put a closer on the door and it'll add a closer up in the corner. You can add an armor plate. Okay, and that usually adds it to the push side of the door because this is more for hospitals. So you're not going to see this very often, but you do have that option. Then in addition to the armor plate, let's shut that off. Let's do a stretcher plate. That's kind of just more for your hands. Again, you see it only usually does it on the push side. So it may say you can do side one and side two. That's applicable in certain door categories, like for instance, the double acting where it can swing both ways, but usually it puts the plates on the push side of the door. Okay, and then let's do a kick plate. Everyone's familiar with a kick plate. And then there is a mop plate. Oops. There you go. Okay, then we have a couple mullion options. So after all of the hardware options, we have show, right now we have no mullion. You can see in between the doors. And this only happens on double doors. A single door would not have any mullion options, but here we have that option. So let's go ahead and look at those. Right now there's no mullion, so if you don't have anything selected, you'll get no mullion. But if you would like to show a removable mullion, you can click that and it will add that in. Okay, and then from the front side, it looks normal. So it's not going to split the doors to make room for the mullion. The removable mullion is flush with the backs of the doors. So in floor plan, it looks like this. Now, if we want to shut that off, we can shut off the removable mullion and it'll disappear. And we can instead put a fixed mullion. So we click there, and that will add space between the doors, and this mullion will be added. So now in 3D, what you'll see is it looks like that. Okay, after the mullions, we have the elevation symbol option. So let me go to a view where we're looking at them head on. Right now, you can see there's a motion symbol in elevation. If you would like those to be shut off, you can turn those off. So show motion symbol in elevation, we can click to hide that, and that'll go away. And then after that, you can control the swing angle in floor plan. So let's go to a floor plan, and let's say we want a 90-degree swing here. We can enter 90, and it'll change it to 90. You also have that same option in 3D. So if we want the door to open in 3D, say for like a rendering, we can open that to 90 degrees as well, and it'll swing the door open. So now it can show us open. And again, you can put in any angle you'd like. So if we want 45, we can put them at 45. Okay, I'm going to close those back to 0. Then in floor plan, you can also control, let's put these back let's swing those at 45. You can also show a swing clearance. So if the doors are actually swinging at 45, you can turn on the clearance right here, and that'll show the rest of the swing. And you can control how big that angle is. Right now it's set to 90, but if you go here to swing clearance angle, we can do 180. So you can see if those doors were opened at 180, it would be this full swing clearance zone. All right, we're going to shut those off. And now we're getting into some more clearances. So let's talk about ADA. So right here, this checkbox turns off the ADA clearances in floor plan. So if I click that button, you'll see it now shows the ADA clearances. I'm going to do this because it's a little less confusing. We'll do it on the single swinging. We'll show ADA clearance. It puts it in red, so if you're doing space planning, you can now plan for ADA clearances. And then when you click underneath turning them on and off, you have side 1 and side 2. So what kind of clearance do you want to show on side 2 and side 1? And if you click this, there's a drop-down list of everything you can do. So for us, side 1 is the pole side. So we'll want to make sure we put a pole side clearance. Right now it's set to front approach, but we could do a hinge approach. And that will change where the arrow is coming from. So now we're approaching from the hinge side, and that changed the ADA clearance to match typical American ADA clearances. All right, let's turn those off. And the last little bit of this category has to do with the mullions inside the decorative mullions inside glass. So this only applies if your door panel has glass in it. So far we haven't talked about door panels yet. So let's talk about how we would change those. Door panels, instead of being an instance parameter, are a type parameter. So if you want to change the way these door panels look, you're going to go and edit the type, and it will be under the graphics section. So here we can change the door panel style. So let's do that. We'll change it to, let's put some glass in it. Let's do a craftsman. Let's do a 2-panel craftsman with half glassed. And let's do colonial mullions and click OK. So that'll rebuild the family and replace the door with a 2-panel craftsman that has colonial mullions. Now when you click on here, you have the option to control the number of horizontal mullions and the number of vertical mullions. So maybe we want a tighter spacing. So right now we have 2 horizontal mullions. If you set it at 3, or sorry, if you keep it at the default 0, it will automatically just calculate something to make it look nice. So if you have a 0 here, it's doing auto calculations. If you would like to manually override it, then you put a number greater than 0. So let's put 3 in and see what it does. It should add another mullion here in the horizontal direction. Now, maybe you like it because that's more of a square ratio, but maybe you don't. Maybe you want them more linear. So let's change the vertical mullions. Let's put that to 4. Just really make them linear. Okay, so now you have control over how doors that have glass and mullions in them, you can control those. If the door panel does not have mullions, then these settings are not going to do anything for you. And then there's this last one that says override horizontal craftsman. So that's if we have a true craftsman mullion. So right now we have colonial mullions. We can go back in and we can choose a door panel with craftsman. So let's do that, a 2-panel. Let's do the same door, but with craftsman mullions, and we'll click OK. Okay, and now what we get is this. So there are not, if I click on this, the horizontal mullions do not have an effect now on this because in craftsman style, there's only 1 horizontal mullion, but it does still control the vertical mullions. So we're going to set the horizontal back to 0 because it's not doing anything. And the vertical mullions, maybe we want 1 less. So let's put 3, and you'll see it changes how many there are. And now what we want is we want the offset from the top of the glass to where this mullion is. Maybe we want it to be a little different. Maybe we're trying to align it up with windows that are adjacent and you want them to look like it's going straight across. So you can override it. If you leave it at 0, it'll automatically calculate. But if we want it exactly 1 foot from the top of the glass, we can type in 1 foot and it will move it. If we wanted it, 8 inches or something, we could put in 8 inches or 9 inches and it'll do 9 inches. Okay. While we are talking about type parameters, let's look at what other parameters are type parameters. Let's click on the Edit Type button, and let's look at what else we have that we can pick from. In here, we can also choose the frame style. By default, all of the residential doors come with a residential frame style. So it'll be made of wood, and typically it's a double rabbet, but you can change it from wood. You can change it from a wood to a single rabbet wood or a double rabbet wood, or you can change to hollow metal, both single rabbet or double rabbet. Then the frame condition, in fact, let's look in floor plan and we can go over what these do. So right now we're talking about the frame inside of the jam. This is if you want to control more the detail or the way it looks. So right now we've got a wood frame, so you can see it's a big solid, and it's got this single rabbet here at the front, or sorry, double rabbet. It's got a rabbet here and a rabbet on the back. If we change it to a single rabbet and click apply, you'll see that the second one on the inside disappears. So now we have a single rabbet jam. Let's put it back to double rabbet. And then now after that, we can control the way the frame sits inside the wall. So for residential, we usually just do flush. The frame goes from one side of the wall to the other. But in commercial, that's not always the case. So let's build a commercial door. Let's make it metal, double rabbet. So I'll show you what that does. So it's not going to change the width yet, but you can see that now is a hollow metal frame. And we can control what that does. Right now, the hollow metal frame is flush, so it's going from face to face. But we can change that to wrap, which is often what we do on the inside of commercial projects. We wrap it around the wall. So these little returns come to the finished jip board, and the jip board runs behind the frame. So essentially, the frame is grabbing the wall. And in that case, we would also probably shut off this trim here. So let's go ahead and shut off the trim on side 1 and side 2. So we would not have trim. And then another thing we could do, we haven't gotten to the dimensions yet, but the trim width, or sorry, the frame, we want the frame width. Oh, that's also a type parameter. So let's change that. So basically we're making this into a commercial door. So frame width on the sides, let's make it 2 inches, and let's make the head 2 inches as well. So now we click that. And now you've got kind of a more commercial door. Let's go back in and look at the final option for the frame style, or sorry, the frame condition is manual. So this is good for like masonry in a commercial application. So now it's not trying to go from face to face. It's not trying to wrap the wall. It's now manually, you can move this frame anywhere you want within the wall. And that comes a little bit later in the parameters. So we can talk about that as we go in just a second. But while we're here talking about these, let's keep going in order. The next thing you can change is the motion symbol in elevation. So let's look at our elevation again. Do you see how we have the motion symbol turned on this door? And this is a typical American symbol, but other countries don't use that, particularly Australia. So there is the option to use the Australian motion symbol. So if you click that and click apply, it flips that symbol to show it how they would in Australia and other parts of the world. Okay, you can also change while you're in here the number of hinges. So right now we have 3 hinges down the side of the door. If this was a 4-foot wide door, I often use 4 or 5 hinges. So you can click that and hit apply and it will add a hinge if you want to get to that amount of detail. Then this last one in the graphics section, this controls that offset distance that I showed you earlier when we're looking in floor plan. Let's change. All right, when I am right here, this line, this distance right here, actually, let's check that. It's the distance, sorry, it's the distance from the door to that line, that guideline. So when I click that button, right now it's set to 4.5 inches, but if you'd like to do it 4 inches or 6 inches, you have the ability to come in here and change that. So let's change it from 4.5 to 6 inches so that you can see. Now it's 6 inches. So now you know when you're aligning your doors to perpendicular walls, you know exactly, you know every one you can line up to be exactly 6 inches or 4.5 or whatever you set that to. All right, let's continue with the type parameters. The next section of type parameters is dimensions, and these mostly do what you'd expect them to do. So the width of the door controls the width, height, and then the thickness of the door are all controlled by type parameters. The ones that you may not be used to are the frame width, which you already saw I have changed. But you can do, just notice that you can do the sides separately from the top. So for example, if you're doing a 7-foot tall door, but you're doing it in masonry, it needs to be 7'4" total cut or total height. So you can put a 4-inch width on the head of this door so that it doesn't have to match the sides. So let's look at that in 3D. You can see when we look at that, or if we look at it straight on, you can see the head is now 4 inches and the sides are 2 inches. Let's continue on. All right, frame depth, that's what you would expect. That controls how deep the frame is. Let me show you in floor plan. That is this dimension here. Okay, so these next couple of settings are a little bit tedious, but they control the frame. So let me try to explain what they do. So this is frame depth from here to here, is how deep the frame is. Rabbet width is, so a rabbet is the little cutout. So this is a double rabbet. So you see there's 2 cutouts. You're controlling the rabbet on the door side. So this is the rabbet width. So that's from here to here, the width of the rabbet. So that's 1/2 inch right now. And then the depth of the rabbet is 1.5 inches. That is this dimension here. And then after that, there's the stop depth, which is 1 inches. So this is the stop, and the depth of that stop is from here to here. So that's 1 inches. Then the frame return, this guy, that is this little piece. So it only applies to metal frames. If you had a wood frame, changing that parameter wouldn't do anything, but you're looking at that. So that's frame return. Then gap. Gap is the little gap in 3D. Let me show you. That is the itty bitty little gap between the door and the frame. So that is so things show up more realistically, especially if you didn't have, say we didn't have a mullion on a double door. If you go to render this, if these doors were perfectly flush without a gap in between them, when it renders, it would look like one solid door. So this is for realistic rendering. If you don't like the gap, you can set it to 0. but otherwise there is the ability to have the gap in there, and it is on by default. Let's go back to our level 1 and look at the other parameters. Okay, so we've got gap. So gap is generally around the door. The hinge gap is specifically at the hinge side because sometimes the hinge is thicker. So there's always going to be a gap to allow for the hinge. And if you change this dimension, it will change the thickness of the hinge as well as the gap between the door on the hinge side. Then there is the hinge projection. You don't see hinges in floor plan, but that is how much the hinge sticks out away from the door. You can control that. The undercut is how much of a gap at the bottom of the door. Some people like to have big undercuts, or if you're designing something at a data center, they often specify a larger gap at the bottom. So the undercut of the door is bigger so that air can flow. And then here is the rough opening clearance. So the rough opening clearance is literally, it doesn't change anything about the model. It just changes the calculation when you do a schedule so that you can schedule the rough opening size. This is how much bigger that rough opening size is from the door size that you've specified. So if the width of this door is 6 feet and the rough opening clearance on the side is 1/4 inch, it'll add a 1/4 inch to both sides. So the rough opening will be 6 feet and 1/2 inch. So it'll add that to the rough opening. So if you're scheduling rough opening, some people don't do it, some people do, but that is what will allow you to control that. So that is all the type parameters. Let's go back to instance parameters. So we left off at the graphics section, but we still have the material section. Materials are self-explanatory. There's the door panel material. You can pick side 1 and side 2 separately, and you can even make the core a separate color if you'd like. Typically, I match the core to one side or the other, but if you needed to have it differently, you do have that ability. Then you have, if your door panel has glazing in it. So not all of the doors do. So if you pick this panel type, glazing, changing the glazing material wouldn't do anything. However, if you had this door panel selected, you can change the glass type. You could do tinted, you could do whatever type of glass you want. Then after that, you have the trim. So this outer trim piece, you can change that for each side. There's a side 1 and a side 2. There's also even a frame. So for people who hide the trim, like on the commercial doors, you can even paint the frame different colors on either side. And then there is the hardware material. And then the frame and finish material are Revit defaults. They won't let me add to them. They won't let me take them or anything out of it. So those are just stuck there. They don't do anything. It's just a thing that Revit does that I can't control. All right, then there are some dimensions that you can control as an instance parameter that are not type parameters. There's the fancy trim head height. So let's look on side 2 of this door. We still have the fancy head trim. So you can change that height. If we would like it to be maybe a foot tall instead of 8 inches, we can make that taller. Okay. Then there's the width. You can change that width. So maybe you're on the exterior of the building. Instead of 3.5 inches, you'd like it to be 5 inches. You can widen that trim width. You can also set the depth of the trim. So typically on the exterior, maybe it's 3/4 of an inch instead of 1/2 inch deep. That'll change how deep it comes off of the wall. And then the plinth height. So down here is the plinth. So maybe you have baseboards that are 8 inches tall and you would like that plinth to catch the surrounding baseboard. So maybe we make it 10 inches tall. So it's just a little bit taller than the baseboard. You can do that. Oh, but I did it on the wrong side. That would be side 2. And then it gets bigger. The hardware height, you can adjust that. So if we'd like it to be 2 feet, 10 inches off the ground instead of 3 feet, you can knock that down, and you can change its offset from the edge of the door. So maybe we want it to go more towards the inside of the door. Let's change it to 3 inches, and you'll see that offsets it 3 inches instead of its previous setting. And then let's talk about frame extensions. For this, you need to see level 1 or the floor plan. And when we would use this is if we have 2 walls. So I'm going to draw wall here, just a standard wall. So there's 2 times I usually encounter this the most. In residential, where I have maybe a foundation wall for a basement, and then I have another wall that's a little less thick. So let's hurry and duplicate this to wall 2, and let's just call it, it's a furring wall, so let's just really quickly make it 4 inches deep. Okay, so here would be, say, my concrete foundation wall, and then I put a furring wall right next to it. Well, I could make these as one wall, but often I don't want to have to make a bunch of different walls. So I just draw the furring wall wherever I need a furring in the basement, and then walls that don't need a furring, I just continue to use my normal foundation wall. So what happens is you can typically put a door in there, but you have to pick one of the walls as the host. So we'll pick the concrete wall in this case. But then you see we've got this problem. Now, typically you can fix this problem by using the join geometry command. And now the door will cut a hole through both walls, even though they're separate walls. But what it doesn't do is, let me show you. Let's get this back to kind of a residential door. It's not as obvious when the frame doesn't go from side to side. So let's do a wooden double rabbit, and let's do it flush. Click OK. And then we'll turn on the trim as well. Okay, so it's going to become obvious now what's happening. It cuts the hole through the second wall, but on the default Revit families, the door families, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to automatically host the trim to the host wall. So you can see the trim is sticking inside of the furring wall. And the frame does not go the full depth of the wall. It stops at its host. So I've created a workaround so that you can fix this, because there's no real other way to fix this. Revit does not allow you to pick where the door extends to. So if you click on the door, and you'll see these two parameters called frame extension on side 1 and frame extension side 2. So on side 2, we don't need to extend it past the host wall, but on side 1, we need to extend it that 4 inches of the furring wall. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to type in 4 inches, and it will extend side 2. Oh, whoops, sorry, I typed the wrong side. Side 1 is the one we wanted to do. We'll extend that 4 inches, and it now reshifts the door so that it correctly grabs the whole wall, even though they're two separate walls. The other time I encounter this a lot is in the commercial world, where I have maybe masonry walls throughout like a high school, but in the locker rooms and in the bathrooms, there's tile all around the bathroom. Well, I don't make a compound wall. I just draw a tile wall in front of the masonry wall. And when I do that, it messes up my doors in the same way that I just showed you here. So those are my two most common scenarios where I would use this. Okay, and with that, we are nearing the end. The last thing that we'll control is, let me get back to our masonry looking door here. Okay, when you have the frame set to be manually placed within the wall, you can use this last parameter. So it is called frame inset. So it insets from the side that the door is on. So we're controlling this distance here. So if we wanted it to, say we want a 4-inch frame. So right now this is a 4-inch frame, but we want it to be flush with side 1. We would name this 0, or we would set this parameter to 0. So if we set that to 0, it'll bring that frame forward to be 0 inches offset. And if you'd like to offset it 6 inches, you can do that as well. Whoops, I just did 6 feet. Okay, so, but the problem with that is the wall's only 8 inches thick and the frame is 4. So if it's offset 6 inches plus the 4-inch frame, that's 10 inches, so it's outside. So we could just do, let's say, 3 inches. Oops, I keep putting feet. Okay, so basically, when you have the frame set to manual, you can manually control its location within the wall. All right, that was a lot, but those are all of the main features and parameters inside of these. Again, you'll find some different ones depending on the door type. A pivot door has the pivot offset distance. The multi-folding doors, you can override the number of panels to have as many panels as you want. If you put it at 0, it's just like everything else. It automatically calculates the number of panels you need. So you can just kind of experiment with all of those other parameters, but most of them are self-explanatory. And if you have any questions, you can always write into us. But that's the overview. Sorry it took so long, but hopefully these are super helpful to you, and happy designing, and we'll see you in the next video.